All right, welcome in everyone to a deep dive. You guys have steered us this time towards an F1 blog. It's called El Decepcionante Inicio de la Era Hamilton and Ferrari. Those from F1 blogs, and it's, well, dissecting that very first race of the 2025 F1 season, right?
Yeah.
So today we're really going to try to understand the blogger's perspective, their initial take on how Ferrari performed, and dives into this dynamic they point out between Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc.
Absolutely, yeah. What I found so interesting about this particular piece on F1 blogs is it's that raw, immediate reaction. Kind of a first take on what, let's be honest, is a pretty lackluster start for Ferrari. It doesn't just focus on the race results themselves, but sort of picks apart these on-track incidents and some of the, well, questionable strategic calls, and then really gets into some, really interesting questions about what's going on inside the team right off the bat.
Yeah, I think that's what makes it so interesting, right? It's not just, oh, they didn't finish where we thought they would. It's like, well, why?
Yeah.
What actually happened? So we're going to, take a look at the key moments of the race through their eyes, kind of understand those early concerns about, Ferrari's competitiveness. And of course, you mentioned it, that on-track dynamic between Hamilton and Leclerc. We're going to go a bit deeper than the usual headlines here.
Yeah, let's jump right in. I mean, let's start with Hamilton, his debut with Ferrari, those moments on track that really, that F1 blogs immediately picked up on. They even mention having like a gut feeling, right, before the race really gets going. What did they see early on?
Right. Well, the blogger, they start off with this kind of funny visual. They say Hamilton's getting two suits for the closet. Kind of a way to imagine him joining the team. It's lighthearted at first, but then it shifts very quickly to Leclerc's move on him in turn one.
Yeah.
And then right after that, Piastri gets past. The blogger even says peaked to describe Hamilton's reaction. Did you pick up on that same sense of, I don't know, annoyance from their writing? I mean, was it more than just what happened on track?
I think so, yeah. I think even when they're describing what seems like a pretty minor thing, the tone, the way they write about it, suggests maybe there's some underlying frustration there. They really emphasize how quickly both Leclerc and then Piastri get by him. They even mention that Hamilton doesn't really put up much of a fight. It's almost as if he was caught off guard, maybe by the car, maybe by the team dynamic. It's early days, right?
And then, well, later in the race, it doesn't get much better, does it? The blogger brings up how both Ferraris, they became a bit of a, I guess you could say, a meme online, particularly because Sauber, a team that's usually further back, ends up finishing ahead of them. It's almost like it sort of highlighted how unexpected and, I don't know, maybe even embarrassing Ferrari's performance was, especially compared to, the expectations they had.
No, you're right. And I think it speaks to this bigger point that comes up right away, that this first race for Ferrari, it really exposes this ongoing problem they seem to have with strategy. And maybe even more so when you factor in how to manage two, extremely competitive drivers. It seems like they're struggling to use the car's potential. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. But it's important to remember, right? I mean, despite all of this, F1 blogs does say both Ferraris still got some points. So even though it looked bad, it wasn't like a total disaster in terms of, the final result. Just a, no, maybe not the prettiest picture of how their race actually went. So let's get into those strategic decisions, the ones that seemed to make things worse for them. What did you see there?
Absolutely. So the blogger really hones in on Leclerc's spin. I think it was actually more of an off-track moment. They even say, straight up, driver error, cost him a few places. Fair enough. But the real issue they have, the real criticism, is this strategic blunder. Keeping both Ferrari cars on hard tires for like 2 whole laps while the rain was just getting heavier and heavier. This, according to the blogger, forced a pit stop at literally the worst possible time. It pretty much killed any chance of a podium finish. They dropped way down the order. And you can almost hear the disbelief in the blogger's words. It's pretty clear. This kind of mistake, it usually means one of two things, right? Either there's a communication breakdown on the pit wall, or they're sticking too rigidly to some pre-race plan, even when conditions change. Not good signs, especially for a top team.
Yeah, it's a big misstep for sure. And F1 Blogs makes a really good point, right? They say even teams lower down the grid, they weren't doing that in those same conditions. It makes you wonder, what happened in Ferrari's decision-making process at that crucial moment?
It really does. It makes you question their ability to read the race as it's happening and then make those quick, decisive calls under pressure. This wasn't just a small error in judgment. This changed their entire race. And this, I think, is where it gets really interesting, maybe even the most talked about part. how the drivers interacted and what the blogger perceived as the overall team atmosphere. So they talk about the freedom to fight directive, which sounds good in theory, right? But then immediately they highlight Leclerc's super aggressive overtake on Hamilton. They even joke about it, calling it removing the HP stickers.
I love that.
Yeah.
For those who might not know, the HP stickers are like a big sponsor logo on Hamilton's car, right?
Yeah.
So it shows you just how close that move was. And the blogger's take on that is really fascinating. They suggest that it might have been, I don't know, more than just hard racing, almost like a statement, a way for Leclerc to assert himself within the team. Do you think that's a valid interpretation? Or could it just be, the heat of the moment, typical race?
I mean, hard racing is part of F1, sure. But when you read their analysis, you can't help but wonder if maybe that freedom they were given wasn't so clearly defined. Like, did they set boundaries? Did they have expectations? Because that move, it felt risky, especially this early in the season and between teammates. And the fact that it was Leclerc, the guy who's been at Ferrari longer, making that move on the new guy, Hamilton, it definitely adds another layer to it.
It does. And, the tension doesn't stop there. F1 Blogs also points out Hamilton's attempt to, I guess you could say, get Leclerc back, which, again, another really close call. So all this early friction between them on track, it definitely seems to have left a bad taste in the blogger's mouth about, the harmony within the team, how well they're functioning.
Yeah. And if we zoom out a bit, F1 Blogs makes this really sharp comparison with how Ferrari finished last season. They were strong, they were competitive, they came second in the championship.
Right.
Now suddenly they're slower in short runs, they're slower in long runs, and there are these mistakes that we just haven't really seen from them before in the very first race. It's understandable why the blogger, and probably Ferrari themselves, would be worried.
For sure. And I like the analogy they use. They compare it to Rossi and Lorenzo back when they were at Yamaha and MotoGP. Two incredibly talented riders, but their rivalry, their internal competition, sometimes it felt like it was more important than the team's goals. Now, beyond just those battles on track, did the blogger hint at anything else that could be impacted by this rivalry, like, team development or resources, like what happened at Yamaha?
You're right. I mean, they don't go into huge detail about how it's impacting development, but the concern is definitely there. It's like that analogy suggests, right? If the focus shifts internally to who's the better driver, rather than actually competing against the other teams, it could become a distraction. It could take away from things that are actually crucial, like car development, strategic planning, even just having the team work together effectively. And in the end, that hurts their chances of winning the championship. And this feeds back into the blogger's initial worry, right? That maybe Ferrari put too much emphasis on signing this star driver Hamilton and maybe, I don't know, overlooked other crucial elements that a team needs to perform well and be cohesive. Things like having a consistently good strategy team, a unified approach to developing the car.
Absolutely. And F1 Blogs even brings up McLaren, how they seem to have a much more stable pairing with Norris and Piastri. Then they ask, well, who's the leader at Ferrari? And because Leclerc has been there longer, they naturally see him as the established leader, which of course just adds another layer to this whole Hamilton-Leclerc thing.
And then there's the actual performance, right? How they did on the track. And F1 Blogs is pretty clear. They were surprised and disappointed. They say Ferrari just didn't have the pace. Not only were they behind Red Bull, which maybe wasn't a huge shock, but they were also behind McLaren and even Mercedes. I think that was a bigger surprise given what people were saying before the season started.
Totally. And the blogger mentions how there were some positive signs, from those long runs on Friday. But then come Sunday, that pace just disappears.
That's worrying, right? It suggests maybe they're struggling to translate what they learn in practice into actual race performance when the pressure's on.
Definitely. And even though it's only the first race of a long season, F1 Blogs is pretty clear about this. The drop in performance compared to where they ended last season in Abu Dhabi, it's big. This isn't just a minor setback. It seems like something more serious. Right. Now, the blogger also gives us a little insight into the drivers' reactions. They mention Leclerc's comments after the race, where he owns up to having a difficult time and specifically takes the blame for that spin at turn 11. Got to respect that, being self-aware like that.
I agree. And Leclerc also expresses concern about their performance in the wet. He points out that it's been an issue for a couple of years now, which suggests it might not be a quick fix, right? Something deeper in the car's design or setup that they haven't quite figured out yet. And F1 Blogs really highlights Leclerc's frustration, specifically about that spin. He felt like it cost him a lot of places, especially when he was running, third or fourth.
And then looking at the next race in China, the blogger mentions Leclerc doesn't sound too optimistic. He doesn't think the track's going to suit them very well. That's kind of telling, right? When a key driver isn't feeling it, that says something about where they see themselves competitively.
What's interesting to me is how skeptical F1 Blogs is about Ferrari's usual excuse, that whole it's more complex than it looks from the outside thing, especially when it comes to these, repeated strategic errors. They flat out say other top teams dealing with the same weather didn't make those same mistakes.
Exactly. And they bring up Hamilton's comment about not being told about rain in other parts of the circuit. That suggests maybe there were communication problems during a really critical part of the race. F1 Blogs even mentioned some radio messages between Hamilton and his engineer, Ricardo Adami, that, well, they hinted at some frustration, to say the least. It paints a picture of a team that's a bit, well, tense, maybe even disconnected.
Yeah, a tense atmosphere, those on-track incidents, the big strategic mistakes. It all leads F1 Blogs to believe that this Hamilton-Leclerc pairing, it's going to make headlines this season. And maybe not always for the right reasons. They bring up Sauber again, finishing ahead of Ferrari. Remember, Sauber's a customer team. They use Ferrari engines. So it almost highlights how Ferrari couldn't adapt their strategy, couldn't be as flexible as maybe a quote-unquote poorer team.
And lastly, F1 Blogs talks about how Ferrari reacted. Did they hold themselves accountable? They mentioned that the team principal, Fred Vasseur, did admit to the Italian press that they made a mistake with the strategy.
Yeah, and Vasseur specifically acknowledged that, Verstappen and Norris, they pitted earlier, better timing with the weather changes. He even brings up their good pace on Friday, which they lost it in qualifying. And then, of course, the race because of those strategic calls. At least he admitted they messed up. But based on everything F1 Blogs pointed out, I think there are some deeper issues they need to address.
So after all that, after going through F1 Blogs analysis, what do you think about Ferrari's first race? What stands out to you?
For me, it's like they're juggling two really tough things at once, right? Trying to bring in this big-name, high-profile driver, Hamilton, and then at the same time, they're still struggling with these strategic issues that keep popping up. The excitement about Hamilton joining, it's been overshadowed by those clashes on track and some head-scratching decisions, let's just say that.
I totally agree. Those questions that F1 Blogs brings up, they're important. Can Ferrari handle two very competitive drivers without it hurting the whole team? Did focusing on getting a superstar like Hamilton mean they missed other crucial things? And can they finally fix these strategic problems that keep tripping them up? This deep dive through F1 Blogs' eyes, it really shows you the pressure, the huge expectations that come with being Ferrari. The way they write, it's direct, it's passionate. It gives you a real-time feel for the challenges they're facing right now.
No doubt. And it makes you think, what do these early struggles mean for the rest of the season? Can Ferrari learn from this? Can they find that balance in the garage and on track and really live up to their name? Or are we seeing the start of something, well, more difficult, more messy? F1 Blogs makes a good point. It's only one race. Things can change so quickly in F1, but the issues they highlighted, they give us, the fans, a lot to think about as the season goes on.
And for more of this kind of great F1 analysis, that immediate, passionate take, make sure you check out F1 Blogs. It's a really cool source for a fan's perspective. Definitely worth following throughout the season.